It's well established that the X gene can do basically anything. It can give you wings, it can let you control the weather, it can make your eyes into portals to the punch dimension, and it can even turn your entire body into living ice cream. Apparently. This is Ice Cream, an X-Men villain whose mutant power is, well, I just said it, he turns into ice cream, which sounds dumb at first, until you really start thinking about it. Ice Cream first appeared in a 1983 one-shot comic called Obnoxio the Cloud, which, as you can tell from the everything, was a parody book of dubious canon, but we'll be coming back to that. In this book, Ice Cream successfully infiltrates X Mansion by transforming, melting himself with a portable temperature control device that he wears, and then just sliding under the door and reforming, getting into the secure facility, in his own words, lickety banana split. The X-Men quickly defeat him, of course, ironically by freezing Ice Cream solid, at which point the titular Obnoxio decorates him like an ice cream sundae, because haha, this guy has a funny joke power. That did work pretty flawlessly for the first part of his plan. The thing that makes Ice Cream actually kind of terrifying is that we see that he can control himself while in ice cream form. Turning into liquid is a very good power to have. Who cares if that liquid is melted ice cream? That's weird, but still works. And yes, before a lot of you ask in the comments, Ice Cream can turn into different flavors at will. He claims any flavor, but I don't know what the actual limits on that are. Does it have to be an existing ice cream flavor, or can he turn into the taste of literally anything? I have no idea. But maybe none of this really matters, because as I said just a minute ago, this was in a parody comic and might not be canon. Wouldn't it be crazy if Ice Cream was canon? Wouldn't that be weird? Yeah, he is. Of course he is. I wouldn't be doing this video if he wasn't. He's only appeared one more time in the Krakoa era of the X-Men, specifically in a book called X-Men Before the Fall Mutant First Strike, which is one of the longest titles I've ever seen. He's only in 2 panels, but has apparently joined the side of good and is now part of a mutant disaster relief squad where he provides food to children whose town was damaged by a supervillain attack. The food is his own composite ice cream, which raises a lot of questions, none of which I can answer, so we're just gonna have to live with it. I don't think the X-Men would allow him to do this if it was a danger though, so it's probably fine. Regardless of that, he is now confirmed to be around and canon, and his power is not the weakest in the mutant roster, so good for you, Ice Cream, you keep doing your thing. We've all seen slime or ooze type characters in fantasy and sci-fi media. That's a very common trope. What is a slightly less common variant of that trope is Jello type characters. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is Jelby, and he is just a delightful little guy. Jelby has only appeared in 2 comics ever, both in the same series, that being Deadpool by Kelly Thompson, in which Wade becomes the king of Monster Island. Jelby is one of Deadpool's subjects here, but he's not a monster, at least not by technicality. Jelby is actually a mutant, and one that Deadpool plans to exploit to get onto the mutant-exclusive island of Krakoa. See, despite common misconceptions, Deadpool is not actually a mutant, he just hangs out with them a lot. But since most mutants don't really like him, that was not enough to get him access through the mutant filtering teleportation gates that take people to the island. So Jelby basically acted as a suit, I guess? Jelby's gelatin-like body can contain things within its form, and by basically wearing Jelby, Wade was able to walk right through the portal and bypass all the restrictions, which none of the X-Men were too happy about. Beyond being an access tool, Jelby was not a major character in this issue, and he actually ends up staying on Krakoa instead of returning to Monster Island. But he would be a much more major figure in his next appearance, literally and figuratively. Issue 10 of the comic proves that Jelby's powers are a bit stronger than anyone was expecting them to be, and he can apparently expand his body out to kaiju size, where he is piloted around by Deadpool and a bunch of other monsters and heroes to fight off Null's symbiote invasion. In what I'm going to call Mega Jelby mode, he is not only strong enough to knock out a symbiote dragon, he is durable enough to tank its hits from both the outside and the inside, as he neutralizes the dragon by just eating it and then keeping it trapped in there. Jelby definitely survives this whole incident, but as I said, this is his last appearance, so we have no idea what his fate was on Krakoa and beyond. However, given that his powers clearly allow him to survive quite a bit, I would be willing to bet that he is still around. Will we ever see Jelby again? I have absolutely no idea, but I do hope so, and until the day that it happens, I'm just gonna choose to believe that Jelby is out saving the world somewhere in his own uniquely gelatinous way. Today on Sir Superhero's Freak of the Week, I'm going to be talking about this corny, pupil. I can't think of any good eye puns. We're going to be talking about Orb. Orb is a Ghost Rider villain, if you can believe it. Yes, this guy fights Ghost Rider. His power, if you can call it that, is that his head is a giant eyeball. That's it, just one big eye. Technically, he does have some minor real superpowers. He says that he can see things other people can't, though this is never really defined. Seems like very minor mind reading, maybe, but nothing beyond that. Of course, I'm sure a big question we all have now is why? Why on earth is Orb like this? And the best answer I have for you is that he just is. Orb's powers have never been explained, not by poor writing, but because that's definitely part of the bit. He doesn't seem to be a mutant or an inhuman or anything like that, primarily because he was born like this. Upon seeing the monstrosity that she had inexplicably given birth to, Orb's mother promptly abandoned him, leaving the eye baby to be raised in a circus freak show. He couldn't even talk at first. He knows how to talk now through unclear means, but it is 100% canon that he could originally only speak by making gross, squishy sounds. As an adult, the disgruntled Orb became a mercenary, which led to him fighting Ghost Rider, and that went about as well as you'd expect. And then he took the natural next step of traveling to the moon, knocking out the Watcher, and stealing one of the unconscious cosmic being's eyes. Hold on, what? Yeah, in 2014, with the help of other villains, of course, Orb stole and bonded to one of the Watcher's eyes, which gave him actual superpowers. He can shoot eye lasers, he can walk on walls for some reason, and of course, his sight abilities have been enhanced greatly, so he's now nigh omnipotent. Unfortunately for Orb, even being elevated to more serious villain status did not save him, as he had the misfortune of going up against a multiversal version of Dr. Doom. And that Doom just killed him immediately because, yeah, what was Orb, even with the Watcher Eye, going to do about that? In death, though, Orb has finally found a place where he is happy, as we have since seen him banished to hell with Mephisto, where Orb can just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk forever. Oh, I should also throw this in really quickly. Orb has been empowered by the Phoenix Force before. It was only once and super briefly, like for an hour at most, but it did happen. I don't even really know how to conclude this video, because how do you wrap up a character arc that begins at Circus Freak and ends at annoying the devil in hell? I guess, in his own words, things worked out pretty good for the ol' Orb. Today on Sir Superhero's Freak of the Week, we are not going to be talking about a villain. We're going to be talking about a monster, specifically a classic Marvel monster from the 1961 Tales to Astonish anthology series. I named Freak of the Week what I did specifically to accommodate for these monster characters as well, because wow, these old horror comics have a bunch of weirdos. And this specific weirdo is Moomba. Moomba is one of my favorite classic Marvel monsters, largely because of his title tagline. Every major monster had something like this, and they're usually talking about how scary or unbelievable the creature is. And Moomba's tagline is just, "Moomba is here." Which, I mean, yeah, he sure is. So, what is Moomba, and why is he here? Like a lot of classic Marvel monsters, he is an alien overlord come to conquer Earth, but the thing that makes him unique compared to the others is that Moomba is made of wood. He's not a tree alien, not like Groot, he is basically a living wooden statue. He's not made of normal wood because he is basically indestructible, so maybe he's petrified space wood or something, I don't know. But his power does not lie in his durability. Moomba's real strength is his strategy. See, Moomba did not come to Earth alone. Long ago, he seeded the planet with armies of his warriors that had disguised themselves as regular wooden statues and then been placed in homes and buildings as decorations, all waiting for Moomba's command to come alive and take over. Great plan at first, because it seems like Moomba would have agents everywhere, except, you know, military bases or secure facilities or anything like that, because those places wouldn't have decorative wooden statues. He's basically placed warriors everywhere but where they would matter the most, but whatever. This flaw would not be the thing that brought him down, though, as Moomba himself ends up getting paralyzed by dark magic and, facing defeat, calls all of his warriors to leave the planet as quickly as possible. At which point, all the wooden statues clump together into a big shape that spontaneously transforms into a working rocket ship and blasts comedically off the planet, because comics in the early 60s were stupid. Moomba would evidently return to Earth later, as he has been seen in more modern comics, though not as a plot point, just as a cameo in many lineups of other classic monsters. Probably for the best that he's not major though, as the original Moomba comic does contain some not great depictions of native African people. For all the fun silliness of early comics, there's a lot of bad, I'm not gonna deny that. But for all the good and all the bad, there is one thing that we can definitively say about Moomba, and that is that he is certainly, undeniably, here. Today on Sir Superhero's Freak of the Week, I think I'm going to set a record for most obscure character covered on the channel, because I would safely bet that less than 1% of my audience have ever heard of Domovoy the Flesh Weaver. Domovoy is the main villain of a very strange little comic, 2021's Khazar, Lord of the Savage Land. I'll be honest, he is a lore-light character, but his concept is incredibly cool and I love his visuals, which is why I decided to give him this episode. As the title Flesh Weaver kind of implies, Domovoy is a biotech-based mad scientist character, obsessed with perfecting the ecosystem of the Savage Land, the prehistoric nature preserve that exists hidden in the middle of Antarctica. Of course, his idea of perfection is incredibly twisted and revolves around these horrifying cyborg animal abominations which he calls polyscions. These polyscions are still animals at their core, but they have been made completely sentient and sapient. However, Domovoy does not do a good job of upgrading his creation's understanding of their existence. Polyscions have human awareness and intelligence, but still the consciousness level of an animal, so they are incredibly confused all the time, and in a very creepy way. I told you, Domovoy is a good concept. He's a great nature-based Eldritch horror villain. Naturally, Domovoy has also upgraded himself. He appears to have once been human or something human-like. We see him without his modifications in a single panel, but in his upgraded state, he's this giant mutated octopus thing dotted with technological panels and neon lights. Again, really leaning into the Eldritch horror aesthetic. As for where exactly he came from, that is something of a mystery. He claims a couple of times to be the original creator of the Savage Land, but that does not really line up with existing lore, so it's likely that he's either lying or just delusional enough to believe that. I can't say if we're ever going to get more answers, as Domovoy is killed at the end of this Khazar series and has not appeared since, but the polyscions, amazingly, are still around. The last pages of the comic show the Flesh Weaver losing control of his creations, at which point they just integrate into the Savage Land's ecosystem. Though again, they have not been seen since, and Marvel might have just dropped this plotline because this book was kind of weird and did not sell very well. In the current state, they are still canon though, so there are a bunch of animal cyborgs running around the Savage Land. And as for Domovoy himself, he doesn't even have his own Marvel wiki page, and I think this video is the most coverage he's ever gotten on the internet. Is he a good character? As I said, this comic was weird. Khazar turns into a bee guy. It's very trippy, but I do stand by Domovoy being a good concept at least, so maybe he'll make a return one day. Did you guys know that Thanos once used the unlimited power of the Infinity Gauntlet to make himself a girlfriend? Yeah, in between all the fighting and killing and half-universe murder, Thanos got a little lonely, I guess, so he snapped himself up a lady friend, and she is the focus on today's Freak of the Week episode. Let's talk about Terraxia the Terrible. As a bit of context, most of us are probably decently familiar with the fact that Thanos is infatuated with the physical incarnation of the concept of death, but for anyone who isn't, yeah, that's his motivation for killing half the universe in the original comics. He wants to do that so that Death falls in love with him. This plan doesn't work. Thanos assembles the Infinity Gauntlet, does his big sacrifice, and Death still rejects him, which outrages Thanos to no end. And then he just decides, well, I now have infinite power, I can make a new person. Thus, immediately after being turned down and right in front of Death's face, Thanos creates Terraxia the Terrible, referring to her as everything my soul longs for and everything that Death is not. And yeah, she also does just look exactly like a lady version of Thanos, which, I mean, there are comments I could make about that, but whatever. In case this wasn't already clear, Thanos is not really that into Terraxia. She's just an attempt to make Death jealous. Like in the panel right after her creation, Thanos looks Death right in the eyes while hugging Terraxia and says, "I no longer have need of you." Some of you now might be wondering what Terraxia's personality is like, and oh, you sweet, poor, innocent soul, she doesn't have one of those. Terraxia is only in 3 comics ever, those being the original Infinity Gauntlet issues 3, 4, and 5. Across those, she has 5 lines, 2 of them are just her shouting, and one of them is confirming to Thanos that she single-handedly killed Iron Man by decapitating him? What the hell? Yeah, she is powerful, at least, though this is never really defined, as Terraxia does die in her 3rd and final appearance. Towards the end of the event, both Thanos and his new girl get cast out into space. Thanos survives this, and Terraxia doesn't. Canonically, because Thanos just forgot to make her capable of surviving deep space, even though he can, and he is the space guy. And that is it. Terraxia is created as Thanos' cosmic rebound. She kills a couple of heroes, then dies, and she has not been seen or referenced since. All in all, I believe her canon in-universe existence lasted less than an hour. What a life, Terraxia, you will be missed. Who am I kidding? No, you won't. Oh well. When I'm talking about a comic book character, an easy place for me to begin is their first appearance. But what if a character didn't have a first appearance? Sure, the villain I'm going to be talking about today technically has a publication first appearance, Avengers West Coast number 61, but this is not his origin story, or any of his background information really, because none of that has canonically happened yet. On today's Freak of the Week episode, get ready for some time travel nonsense, because we are going to be talking about Oort the Living Comet. I love Oort. He is perhaps my favorite one-off villain of all time because his concept is just so incredibly clever. He is not the main focus of the only comic he appears in though, far from it. Rather, he is part of a team of villains assembled by Immortus, a future timeline version of Kang the Conqueror. To effectively mess with the West Coast Avengers, Immortus pulls a batch of superhumans from different points along time, each one of them specifically chosen to counter a member of the hero team. Most of these are chosen for psychological reasons. Wonder Man has to fight his brother, the evil Grim Reaper. Hawkeye does battle with Swordsman, one of his mentors who taught Clint how to fight, and so on. But Quicksilver's nemesis is Oort the Living Comet, and Pietro has no idea who this man is. Turns out that this is because Quicksilver's perfect counter-villain is from the future of Pietro's timeline. Quicksilver and Oort do fight, but they fight in the 50th century. We don't get a lot of details about this future conflict. We learn that Oort is also a speedster and he can shoot some sort of energy projectile, but that's about it. Evidently he was a good counter for Quicksilver though, because Oort does win. Save for the Wasp, who was intentionally holding back in her fight, every other member of the West Coast Avengers beats their villain counter, but Oort does defeat Quicksilver. In the montage at the end, the Avengers stand victorious, and then Quicksilver's just unconscious on the ground. Granted, he only loses because Oort went very tactical and distracted Quicksilver by targeting Scarlet Witch, who was in stasis and vulnerable at the time, a trick that he apparently also used in their future conflict. What happens to him after this, we unfortunately have no idea. Even though Quicksilver got his ass whooped, the other Avengers winning was enough to turn the tide, and Immortus is defeated, with his summoned characters vanishing. Now I'm just waiting for Marvel to inevitably tell the other half of the story. Quicksilver has met Oort for the first time, now I need to see Oort meet Quicksilver in the future and complete the loop. It's a simple idea, but a really logical one. Kang wouldn't need to limit himself to the past when looking for counter-henchmen. I love Oort, and I really need to see where he ends up. Or where he started, I guess. Today on Sir Superhero's Freak of the Week, we have a 3-in-1 episode, or a 4-in-1, or just one. It kind of depends on how you count it. There's a sort of Ben 10 situation going on here. This is Manikin, and he/they, I guess, have a very weird set of abilities. Manikin's real name is Whitman Knapp, Dr. Whitman Knapp to be specific, as before he was a superhero, he was a physician helping out the Canadian super team Alpha Flight. As often happens with regular people helping out superheroes, he gained powers of his own eventually, specifically the power to summon what are described as different versions of himself along his evolutionary timeline. These versions include Ape Man, basically just a caveman with super strength, Highbrow, a lanky futuristic humanoid with telepathy and teleportation, and then swinging way back to the past, Proto, just kind of a blob of protoplasmic goo that can dissolve stuff. This is a cool enough idea, right? Ben 10, but instead of aliens, it's different points in humanity's evolution. I like that. Except here's the thing. I did say that Manikin summons these forms. He doesn't turn into them. Dr. Knapp, as the superhero Manikin, just kind of calls these 3 other dudes to the battlefield, and that's it. He can't even exert direct control over them, though his other forms do typically listen to his commands. In reality, he's less like Ben 10 and more like a Pokemon trainer for these 2 men and 1 blob. Maybe unsurprisingly given this, he wasn't a superhero for very long. After getting his powers, he moved from being a doctor to being a member of the training team Beta Flight, but once that team disbanded, he just went back to being a doctor because he felt that's where his skills were better used. Which, yeah, I mean, he was kinda right about that. He would remain in the Alpha Flight superhero sphere, though, and later in the run, his powers would fittingly evolve when all of his other versions died, and this gave him the ability to transform directly. So no more summoning, now he is just evolutionary Ben 10. He was only in this status quo for a handful of issues, but it would be how he showed up in his shockingly recent 2019 appearance. This would be in the Valkyrie Jane Foster comic, alongside a whole team of medically qualified superheroes. During these only 2 issues, his proto form died, but somehow this seemed to unlock his other forms again, and at the end of the comic, we see them all separate. Except for Proto, who's just still dead. This is his most recent appearance though, so I can't say for sure what he's doing now, but yeah, I guess he's back to being a summoner of past and future humans. It's a cool power to be sure, but man is it anime levels of specific. Somebody write Manikin fighting the High Evolutionary. I really want to see that. Back in the 1970s, Marvel released a comic called Marvel Premiere, which they often used as a sort of testing ground to gauge audience interest in new things. Sometimes this worked out great. Marvel Premiere was the first time that the character of Adam Warlock was really developed and spotlighted. But other times, it gave us things like Woodgod. Who the hell is Woodgod? Woodgod is an artificial being made by geneticist David and Ellen Pace as an attempt to create a human and animal hybrid, which nothing ever goes wrong with, right? Yeah, well, the problem in this case was that the Paces weren't doing this in a lab. They were making these creatures just kinda in their house, and so when the people of their small New Mexico town found out that mad scientists were creating monsters nearby, they overreacted a little bit. In the subsequent raid and chaos on the Pace farm, the townspeople accidentally smashed a giant tube of nerve gas that was just laying around, and the subsequent burst of poison killed everybody in the entire town except for the young Woodgod. Incredibly traumatized by everybody around him almost instantly perishing, the satyr-like creature then went on a confused rampage. And that's all the Woodgod Marvel Premiere one-shot is. It's just his origin story, and then him going a little bit crazy. This did immediately lead into another comic, this one being a Spider-Man and Hulk team-up, where the pair meet Woodgod, at first fight him, and then in classic superhero fashion, realize that he's not actually evil, he's just basically a traumatized child, and they team up with him to help stop a government guy who's trying to track down and imprison the satyr. Then he would drop off the map entirely for a couple years until 1980, at which point Woodgod would reappear, having mastered genetics himself and created an entire civilization of human and animal hybrids that he was now the secret leader of. And that was his last major appearance. Woodgod was just kind of created, had a very brief hero team up, and then made his own little mini civilization of animal hybrids. But keyword there is major appearance, he has had a few minor ones. Woodgod gets a brief cameo or one-off appearance every 10 years or so, whenever writers want to say, hey guys, remember how we have a canon Frankenstein satyr guy who just never matters running around? Isn't that weird? His peaceful civilization of animal people did all get brutally murdered in a Nick Fury comic though, so even though he's not seen on the page, don't automatically assume that means Woodgod is having a good time. And no, despite his name, Woodgod has no plant or nature powers whatsoever. He's just kind of a super strong guy with goat legs who lives in the woods. And he is canon, so good for him. Will he ever matter? I have no idea. Don't judge a book by its cover. That's the moral of today's Freak of the Week episode. Because in a second I'm going to show you a character, and he is a good guy. He's a very good and nice man, I promise. But also he looks like this, so at least one of you probably clicked away at that. He's nice, I promise. This is Kljt-Man. Don't worry, I'll explain that name too. Kljt-Man's real name is Burr Dalen, and he is a being from the microverse, or quantum realm, to use the more common MCU term, and that alone probably made his appearance make a lot more sense. Burr Dalen was first encountered by Ant-Man, Scott Lang Ant-Man to be specific, and the Wasp, Nadia Van Dyne Wasp to be specific again, when they shrunk down to microverse scale and got trapped there. As you might be able to tell from his cute little lab coat, Dalen is a doctor working for the military of his people known as the Sarg. When the Sarg captured the human explorers, Dalen recognized that they were not in fact a threat and freed them so that they could return to their home. This is really his only role in the one miniseries that he's appeared in. Burr Dalen is the local knowledge type character helping Ant-Man and the Wasp get back to Earth. But he does join the action on a few occasions, as despite him being a quantum entity, Pym particles do work on him. This leads directly into his superhero arc, as in the final issue of the comic, the heroes obviously make it to Earth, but in recognition of Dalen's help and his heroic spirit going against the military to free innocent people, they leave him with a specially fitted Ant-Man suit. And since the quantum realm or microverse doesn't have ants, he named himself after their sort of equivalent, which are called Kljts. Therefore, Burr Dalen became Kljt-Man. He has only appeared 2 times in this identity, one immediately after getting the Kljt-Man suit, and another 2-page cameo in a damage control comic, because comics damage control is very different than the MCU version. This was a relatively recent book though, it was in 2022, so it's not like Kljt-Man has been abandoned for decades. He is apparently still an active hero, and could just show up at any time, which is kind of terrifying. So to return to the moral, don't judge a book by its cover, and don't judge a hero by his many mouths and eyes and tentacles and maybe some combination of them. It's actually not entirely clear which holes do what. You know what, I'm just gonna stop talking about his appearance right now. Kljt-Man is great, and we don't have to worry too much about what he looks like.